Hey guys, it's the 7th episode of our full History of Pripyat. Be sure to watch the previous 6 later, after watching this one. We already discussed how the place for this nuclear power plant and the city were chosen, how the political system worked in the USSR, how it impacted every aspect of the Union's economy and the obstacles during the construction. Also, why it was Viktor Bruykhanov who was supervising the whole project and what it meant for the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR. This time we will tell you more about the human perspective, mostly that of Bruykhanov. Let's start with the next part. History of Pripyat, Part 7. When Viktor Bruykhanov first got to Chernobyl town and moved closer towards the construction site, his family soon joined him. When more and more workers arrived as well, the need for proper housing and infrastructure was growing too. The nuclear power plant was being built step by step, and the plan was to commission one reactor after the other. That was a regular practice around the world. Having in mind that in the USSR there were shortages of almost every material needed for the construction, that plan was some kind of response to those problems. After the first reactor would start working, there would be at least stable power to move the construction farther. And besides the construction workers, there were more people coming, including specialists that would later work in the power plant. That's why the managers had to start creating housing buildings quickly. Maybe a lumberjack could live with his family in a makeshift cottage deep in the woods for some time, but that wasn't the case for a nuclear facility specialist, not even in the USSR. Most of the people coming to Pripyat, a city under heavy construction, were idealistic and deeply motivated. They weren't discouraged by no heating or other huge inconveniences, but they still had to fulfill at least basic needs. Valentina and Viktor Bruykhanov, the most important people there, were among the first to move into the new apartment buildings with a view of the city entrance. It was winter 1972. Almost 2 years after Valentina, Oleg and Lilia joined Viktor, and they all were seeing the city being built from scratch. Even though they moved from the temporary village of Lesnoy to Pripyat, the Atomgrad was still missing a lot of infrastructure needed for a normal life. Each day, the daughter, Lilia, hitchhiked back to Lesnoy to attend lessons in the forest school. Her day was similar to many other people there. Pripyat and Chernobyl nuclear power plant were close to each other, but it was still a few kilometers between them. You may wonder why Pripyat wasn't built exactly near the power plant, and the answer is simple. Soviet Union laws required to create a sanitary zone. It was an area around the plant where building was prohibited, and it wasn't anything out of order. Soviet regulations were implemented to ensure that the residents of the city won't be exposed to fields of low-level ionizing radiation. To be honest, when there was no public transportation back then, most of the people who needed to get from the city to the power plant could just walk. It was about 3 kilometers between those two places, so around 30 to 60 minutes by foot, depending on how quickly you walk. But regulations were one thing, and practice was another, especially in the Soviet Union. People living in the area would quickly disregard the building ban, and a lot of them were kind of squatting in the sanitary zone. A lot of them built some small dachas, which are kind of summer or country houses, often with some small gardens. To understand that, you have to get an image of what the life of a typical USSR citizen was like. There were often shortages of everything, food included, so people tried to do what they could to prevent starving. This wasn't the case for Pripyat, but its residents came there from different parts of Soviet Union nonetheless. They had their own experiences and were taught by their parents and grandparents that they should take care of themselves. It wasn't anything unusual for USSR citizens to grow food wherever they could. Balconies, small gardens created by the wall of the apartment houses. The same situation was with everything else. People had to know how to repair things they had, from a belt to a radio. Even if someone could do it for them, there were often no spare parts. Even now, it's very common in post-Soviet countries. A lot of cities have allotment gardens, which are permanently rented by the citizens who grow food, flowers and fruit trees there. And however it's changing fast, a lot of people in the previous Warsaw Pact countries mostly have knowledge of what an American could call living off the grid, at least partially. The second thing is the sanitary zone itself. Remember, both Pripyat and Chernobyl nuclear power plant were literally built from scratch in the thick woods and marshes near the Pripyat river. Imagine how this place could look like 50-60 years ago. It was almost a wilderness with all the upsides of that, including fresh air, beautiful meadows, old copses and forests. And on top of that, with the construction of the power plant, a huge reservoir was created, which looked basically like a big lake. Wouldn't you like to have a summer house in a place like this? Because I would love to. The third thing was that these regulations were ignored partially because of Soviet propaganda. Nobody would tell the citizens that they could be endangered by low-level ionizing radiation. And they were also told that it was the most advanced power plant in the whole world. So, why would be the sanitary zone needed? Probably they thought that it was just a blind following of a law that nobody actually listened to, which was a common situation in the USSR. Despite the people coming to live there, and the construction of the city and the plant going on, the economy of the Soviet Union wasn't something Viktor Bruykhanov could just avoid and get what he needed somewhere else. The plan Bruykhanov got from Moscow said that the first reactor was supposed to come online in December 1975, so around 5 years after the formal start of the project. This was a part of the 9th five-year plan, as called by the Soviet Union. And as the plan also specified, the second reactor was supposed to be activated 4 years later, in 1979. Workers poured the first cubic meter of concrete into the foundations of the plant around the fall of 1972, only a few months before Bruykhanov and his family moved to one of the first apartment buildings in Pripyat. Because of the additional construction stage, the overhaul I told you about in one of the previous episodes, you can save the link from the upper right corner for later, the costs rose exponentially, and the time goals set by this plan were impossible to reach. And, however, it was probably the biggest problem Viktor had on his mind, it surely wasn't the only one. Thanks for watching. This was the 7th episode of Full History of Pripyat. If you're interested in hearing more about this specific subject, be sure to watch the 6 previous episodes. And if you want to learn more about Chernobyl in general, take a look at our Chernobyl Stories playlist, where you can find information about HBO's Chernobyl miniseries, about Dyatlov, about Legasov, and many more. That's it for today, guys. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.